I woke to the metallic tang of blood in my mouth and the sharp throb in my temple that told me I hadn't fainted. I'd been hit. Again. The kitchen tiles were colder than I remembered, sticky under my cheek where the blood pooled. I could hear the coffee pot clicking as it finished brewing, its gurgling rhythm cutting through the silence like a metronome ticking off how long I'd been down. I didn't cry. Not right away. Maybe because this wasn't the first time. But it was the first time my head had met the corner of the table with such force that I saw stars. Tiny, bright pricks scattered across a dark ceiling I couldn't even look up at. Briar, my father by title, not by choice, had yelled something about how breakfast wasn't ready. Then his voice turned into movement, his hand into weight, and my forehead into a point of impact. I didn't even scream. I think the silence after was worse than the pain. It told me nobody was going to stop him, not even her. People say blood is thicker than water, I remember thinking, but it's also harder to scrub out of tile. I shifted, trying to lift myself on one elbow. The room spun. I breathed in the scent of scorched toast and burnt oil. Not even the smell of violence was unfamiliar here. What stopped me wasn't the injury. It was the words he'd left behind. "You're not my daughter. You're just the maid around here." I'd heard worse. Harsher insults. But this one sliced cleaner than any bruise he'd left. It rewrote my name, recast my childhood. Everything I'd done for them, the laundry, the cooking, the smiling through company dinners, it all collapsed into that one word, maid. I wasn't a daughter. I was labor with no paycheck. In towns like Lufkin, girls like me weren't born to be heard. We were born to be helpful. I was a helper at every church potluck, a background blur in every family photo, never the focus. Just the hands that stirred the gravy and wiped the counters after. Even as blood traced a path down the side of my face, what echoed wasn't the pain. It was the echo of every thank you that never came, every room I cleaned while guests laughed in the living room, every time my mother smiled over my shoulder at someone else. I tried again to sit up, and this time my gaze landed on her. Cressida stood in the doorway, robe knotted neatly at her waist, arms crossed like she was overseeing a mess someone else had made. Her eyes didn't widen, her feet didn't move. The only thing that stirred was her slipper tapping, slow and steady, like she was keeping time in a song only she could hear. My lips parted, not for a scream, there was no point, but for a name. Mom. Her eyes didn't flicker. Nothing about her expression shifted. It was as if she were carved from stone, only alive enough to judge from a distance. If pain had a shape, I thought, hers was the silhouette of apathy. She'd seen this before. We both knew that. But this time, I'd fallen harder. This time, there was blood. This time, it was the table, not just his voice. And still, she didn't move. The weight of her silence crushed me harder than Briar's hands ever could. The woman who once brushed knots from my hair now stood at a threshold between me and help, and chose to stay on her side. I don't know how long I stared at her. I only know that when she finally turned, she didn't look back, just walked away, like I was a noise she could mute by leaving the room. My hand found the phone on the floor by the fridge, screen smeared red with a fingerprint that didn't belong to anyone but me. My thumb shook. My chest tightened. I hovered over the dial pad. If I called, I couldn't uncall. If I spoke, I couldn't unsay it. But then I remembered what he'd said. Not the slap, not the name, but the truth underneath it. "You're not family." That was the push I needed. I pressed the numbers. The ring lasted 3 seconds before a voice answered. Calm, professional, a woman. 911, what's your emergency? I didn't hesitate. This is Ayala Martin. I've been assaulted. I have proof. She didn't gasp. She didn't question. She just said what I needed to hear. Help is on the way. And just like that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one cleaning up the mess. I was calling it in. I stayed on the floor, watching the ceiling like it might shift and let in air. I counted the seconds, not to pass time, but to steady my breath. The oven's metal door reflected a version of me I hadn't seen before, bloody, battered, but awake. I wasn't waiting for rescue, I thought. I was waiting to no longer be afraid. At 17, I tried something similar. A bruised arm, a guidance counselor. A phone call to my mother that resulted in a tearful church testimony about rebellious daughters and misunderstood parenting. The fallout had silenced me for years, but this time I wasn't 17, and I wasn't asking, I was reporting. The red and blue lights spilled through the kitchen window a few minutes later. No siren, just a flash and a knock at the door. Cressida appeared again, this time at the hallway edge. Her arms still folded, but now her mouth moved. "What have you done?" she asked, not scared, not surprised, just irritated. I didn't answer her. I looked past her, waiting. The doorbell rang. My heart didn't pound. It pulsed like a drumbeat I was ready to walk to. I stood, slow, steady, blood drying at my hairline. I opened the door. The badge was real. The silence wasn't. The red and blue lights were still washing across the kitchen walls when the front door creaked open. I didn't turn my head. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of authority step into the room. The boots hitting hardwood were heavier, steadier, unafraid. It wasn't the sound of chaos anymore. It was structure, boundaries. Finally, I blinked hard and saw her, mid-50s maybe, gray streak through her dark braid, uniform pressed, shoulders square. She looked straight at me, not down, not away, just at me. She's overreacting. She just gets emotional. That was the first sentence my mother offered, calmly, like she was explaining a stain on the rug. The officer didn't flinch. Neither did I. I sat up, blood crusted to the side of my temple, and said, "I didn't call because I was emotional. I called because he broke me." She nodded once. Not like she was agreeing, but like she heard me, really heard me. Deputy Claire, her nameplate glinted as she knelt beside me, asked if I could speak clearly. I said yes, and for the first time it was true. She studied the bruising along my cheekbone, didn't touch, just looked. "Can you walk?" "I can try." One of the other officers moved through the kitchen. I could hear Breyer still talking, defensive, slurred. "I just needed some quiet," he barked, like my skull was too loud for him to think. Claire motioned for someone to help me to the couch while she stayed close, crouching to keep eye contact. "Tell me what happened," she said. So I did. Calm, direct, no embellishments, just the facts. That he was drinking, that he came into the kitchen, that he asked about breakfast and got angry when I wasn't quick enough, that he slammed my head against the edge of the table. She didn't blink, just kept writing. I handed over a USB drive. "There's footage, hidden cam, he's done it before." Claire took it without comment. I saw one of the officers return from the back, nod slightly to Claire. That was enough. "Take him," she said. They cuffed him right there, no fight, no yelling. He just sighed and muttered, "Drama queen," on his way out. He didn't fight back. Maybe because someone finally said no. The front door closed behind him, but the air in the house didn't change. It was still stale, like the walls weren't done holding secrets. I turned to look for Cressida. She was standing by the fireplace, arms crossed like always, jaw set. I waited for her to say something. Anything. "You know what you've done to this family?" she finally whispered. I stared at her. Her? She was worried about the family now. "You watched," I said, flat. "You didn't even blink." Her eyes narrowed. "We don't call the cops on family." "No," I said. "You don't. That's the problem." The ambulance came faster than I expected. EMTs checked my vitals, asked questions. I gave clipped answers. I didn't cry. There wasn't time for that. I climbed into the back, and just before the doors closed, she slipped in beside me. I didn't want her there, but I didn't stop her. The siren didn't wail. It was just lights now, flickering through the windows as we rode. I sat with my back against the metal, staring at the sterile white ceiling, feeling the road hum beneath the wheels. She didn't say anything, just stared ahead. Her fingers tapped against her thigh, the same rhythm I'd seen her use while waiting for bread to bake or guests to arrive. It hit me then. Her silence wasn't fear or guilt. It was habit. I glanced at her, remembering the wine I once spilled at dinner, how she handed me a rag without a word, like I was the maid, like messes were mine to clean, no matter who caused them. The table we sat at that night, the one where I bled hours ago. Same place, at the ER. Fluorescent lights swallowed every shadow. Nurses were efficient, kind, but distant, like they'd seen worse and knew how to keep their distance. They scanned my head, stitched the small split at my brow. I answered all the intake questions without hesitation. Name, date, cause of injury. When the nurse asked if I wanted to report domestic abuse, I looked her in the eye and said, "Already did." That was new. That felt like a win. Cressida lingered nearby, arms crossed, glancing around like she was bored in a waiting room instead of at her daughter's bedside. "She tends to exaggerate," she told the nurse when asked how it happened. The nurse glanced at me, then at her, then back at me again. No words, just a quiet understanding that didn't need to be said aloud. The doctor came in and did his exam. After 5 minutes, I turned to him and said, "I don't need an audience. I need air." He nodded. "Ma'am," he said, looking at her, "please wait outside." She left, without protest, but not before she gave me a look that said, "You just love playing the victim." I didn't return it. I didn't need to. Hours passed. My head cleared, my breath steadied, and I finally stretched out on the stiff hospital cot, staring at ceiling tiles that looked like they hadn't been replaced since the 90s. Claire reappeared before I could drift off. "He's being held overnight," she said. I nodded, grateful but exhausted. "But it's not just tonight that needs fixing," she added. I looked at her, tired, raw. "Do I get to decide what tomorrow looks like?" She didn't smile, didn't patronize, just said, "You already did, when you made that call." I turned my head toward the window. Dawn was breaking, pink and gold washing the world clean. Then my phone buzzed. A message. No contact name. Just a forwarded email. Subject line, "I should have spoken up years ago." I opened the email with one eye still bruised and the other blinking against hospital light. The subject line said it all. I should have spoken up years ago. I didn't have to guess who it was from. Eulalia, the doctor I saw for nearly a decade, the one who always smiled too much when my mother was in the room, and too little when it was just me. Inside the message was a long paragraph, soft in tone, apologetic in structure, but sharp in content. She admitted what I already suspected. She had altered my medical records, not because she thought I was lying, not even because she didn't care, but because, as she wrote, "Your mother insisted it was for family peace." Peace. That word made my fingers curl around the edge of the hospital bed. Peace was the lie that wallpapered every wall in our house, clean, polite, and silent. There were attachments. PDFs of records she now claimed were not entirely accurate, scanned copies of forms with handwriting I didn't recognize, but signatures that matched mine just enough to pass. One file was a report from the time I came in with a bruised wrist. The note read, "Patient reports tripping on laundry basket." I never said that. I said, "He grabbed me." But that truth had apparently been edited for comfort. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I just sat there, rereading her words until the screen dimmed. The only thing more dangerous than violence is silence signed in ink. I turned the phone over and let it rest on my lap. My body ached, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. It triggered something buried, a memory I hadn't summoned in forever. Thanksgiving, maybe I was 14. We had guests over from church. I spilled red wine on the tablecloth, the one Cressida had ironed that morning with military precision. It wasn't even much, just a splash. The glass slipped. It happens. She handed me a rag and told me to clean it, in front of everyone. I remember Azura had broken a plate earlier that day, and all he got was a kiss on the forehead and a whispered, "It's okay, baby." Me. I was on my knees scrubbing Merlot while Pastor's wife tried not to look too horrified. Back then, I thought I was clumsy, that something about me lacked grace. But now I know. I wasn't clumsy. I was unwanted. The difference is everything. There was a knock at the hospital room door. A gentle tap, then a nurse peeked her head in. "Someone's here to see you. She said her name is Claudia." Claudia? I didn't know a Claudia. I sat up. "Send her in." The woman who stepped in had hair darker than mine and eyes I recognized instantly. She didn't sit right away. She just looked at me like someone who had been waiting a long time for this exact moment. "I'm Claudia," she said, finally. "I think we're sisters. Half-sisters, technically." "I'm from before." "Before? My dad. Your dad. He was married before he met your mom. I was born from that marriage. When he remarried, well, let's just say your mother didn't want reminders." She handed me an envelope, fat, with letters and old photos. "I kept these. You weren't supposed to see them, but I thought you should." I opened one. Me, maybe 5, in a backyard I didn't recognize, wearing a necklace I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. In another photo, Claudia stood next to me, maybe 16. We both wore the same necklace. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A family gift, probably, passed to both of us like some invisible inheritance of being inconvenient women. "She did the same thing to me," Claudia said quietly. "Isolated me. Called me unstable. Said I made things up." "When people are made to disappear," she added, "the first thing they lose is their voice." That hit me like a second slap. I didn't even know what to say. So instead, I pulled out the legal pad from my bedside drawer and started writing. Name, date, incident. Who knew? What they said. What they denied. This is no longer a story. This is a report. After Claudia left, I sat with the photos spread across the hospital bed. Faces I wasn't supposed to remember. Events I wasn't supposed to recall. But my mind, my inconvenient, relentless, questioning mind, had held on. A new nurse came in. She was young, maybe 24, with quick hands and tired eyes. She checked my IV, adjusted a monitor, then leaned closer. "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but your mother's called the front desk 6 times today, asking who you've talked to, asking if you've had visitors." I didn't flinch. "She's not just trying to clean up," I said. "She's trying to erase footprints." "Sounds like she's nervous," the nurse replied. "Good," I said. Then added, "Thank you." After she left, I scanned Eulalia's documents and emailed them to Deputy Claire with a subject line that read, "Medical record tampering, supporting files attached." I began another list, not of names, of people I would no longer protect. I titled it, "Accountability, Pending." Just before dinner, trays rolled down the hallway, my phone buzzed. No name, just a number. The text read, "I heard you're making quite the story, Ayala. Careful who you drag down with you." I read it twice. Didn't need to check who sent it. I knew that voice even in text. I locked the phone, turned to the window. Night was settling over Lufkin, but I didn't feel small anymore. "I'm not dragging," I whispered. "I'm documenting." The nurse didn't say much as she handed me the discharge forms, just one quiet look that hovered a second longer than necessary. Not pity, more like confirmation. That kind of silence women learn to speak fluently. Her eyes skimmed over the bruising beneath my temple, the skin yellowing at the edges, and then back to mine. "You don't look like the one who should be leaving," she said. I gave her a tired smile, not in agreement, not in defiance either, just understanding. Deputy Claire had suggested I stay at the women's shelter. She'd even made the call for me. "You'll be safe there," she'd said, voice even. But I wasn't looking for safety. Not yet. Not until I could walk out of my mother's house with everything that still had my name on it. Closure wasn't a warm bed or a new pillow. Closure was mine, and it was in the room I had to walk back into, not the one I could escape. I didn't bring anyone with me, no lawyer, no friend, no backup. It felt important that I do this alone. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. Cressida stood behind the front door, watching through the curtain. Of course she was. She didn't open it right away, made me knock. When the latch clicked, she didn't move aside, just let the door creak open halfway and leaned into the frame. "You don't have to make this ugly," she said. "I'm here for my things." She stepped back, barely. As I crossed the threshold, her voice followed like a cold breeze. "Don't drag this out. People are watching." I didn't bother asking who. I already knew. Neighbors, church friends, women just like her who had mastered the art of pretending. You mean the ones you've been performing for? I said without turning. Her lips tightened. Don't make us look bad. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I walked past the living room wall where the family portraits hung, painted smiles and color-coordinated outfits. I wasn't in any of them past the age of 12. Funny, how a wall can tell you more about your own life than your mother ever has. Azura's face was everywhere. Awards, graduation tassels, framed commendations, a photo of him shaking hands with a local politician. Me? Not so much as a blurry shot. They don't delete you, I thought. They just pretend you were never part of the file. The kitchen was exactly as I remembered, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and silent judgment. But this time, something was different. On the table sat a cake box. The lid was open, and inside was a lemon chiffon cake piped with blue and white frosting. I froze. I knew that cake. I baked it 3 weeks ago. Left it in the freezer with a note. Just in case we celebrate anything. Now, it had red icing letters on top. So proud of you, Azura. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt insulted. I touched the edge of the box. Not for sentiment, but for confirmation. My piping. My imperfect spacing between the roses. Flashback. Me in the kitchen, alone at midnight, humming under my breath while mixing the batter, trying not to hope it would be for me. Just baking, just in case. And here it was, displayed as if I'd never existed. Cressida walked past me on the phone, voice too loud, too cheerful. We're all doing better now, she said to whoever was on the other end. Back to normal. Just a little hiccup. Normal. That word again. In the hallway, I heard Azura's voice, on speaker. It's all being handled. She overreacted. My hands clenched. You can survive a beating, I thought, but surviving erasure takes longer. I grabbed a trash bag and started packing. Not folding, not sorting, just grabbing. Clothes, books, small things I'd bought with babysitting money when I was a teenager. Things no one would miss because they never saw them in the first place. Then I found it, tucked under a stack of church newsletters on the counter. A handwritten note. Thank you for praying for us, it read. Our daughter is going through a difficult phase. A phase. I took the note, walked into the kitchen, and set it next to the cake. Cressida paused mid-sentence when she saw me. I didn't wait for her to finish. I may be in a phase, I said, calm, but at least it's not denial. Her face didn't change. Not a flicker. That kind of restraint takes years to master. Azura walked into the room and saw us, saw the cake, saw the note. Then he turned around and left, like it was a scene he didn't want to be in. This wasn't a conversation. It was a marking of territory. I scribbled a message on a yellow sticky note and slapped it on the fridge. Keep the cake. You're better at slicing people up anyway. With that, I slung the garbage bag over my shoulder and walked out. Cold air hit me on the porch. I paused to breathe it in, let it fill my lungs like something earned. As I approached the car, I saw it. Something tucked under the windshield wiper. A note, folded neatly, weighted by a pebble. I unfolded it slowly, even though I already knew. If you air this out, we all go down. Choose wisely. No name. But I didn't need one. I stared at the paper, let the words settle. Then I crumpled it and tossed it into the passenger seat without a word. I had already made my choice. Nina's guest room had mismatched sheets, a lamp that flickered every few minutes, and a faint smell of lavender from an old sachet hanging on the closet door. And yet, it was the first place I'd breathed without restraint in days. I lay there that morning, sunlight sneaking through crooked blinds, listening to the hum of her dishwasher and the low murmur of a local talk show in the other room. It reminded me of when we were teenagers, sneaking out through the side door to avoid creaky floorboards, convinced the world owed us something better than curfews and casseroles. Back then, freedom felt like the wind on the back of a bicycle at midnight. Now it tasted more like black coffee and quiet space. Nina poured me a cup and slid into the chair opposite mine, elbows on the table like we hadn't missed a decade of adulthood between us. You've always carried them, she said, eyes fixed on the rim of her mug. Maybe now it's time you carry yourself." She didn't mean it as pity. She never had. Even in this borrowed space, I felt more seen than in that house where I was born. No framed lies, no faux smiles, just breath, room, and a bed that creaked only when it needed to. Still, I had to go back. Some of my things were there, things I paid for, things that still had my scent. And I wanted them not because they were valuable, but because I chose them. I wanted to reclaim even the smallest proof that I had existed on my own terms. So by midday, I pulled into the driveway of Cressida's house. The front door was locked. Good. That meant she wasn't home. I let myself in with the spare key taped under the planter on the porch, the same spot I used to hide it when Azura forgot his keys. The house was quiet, unnervingly so. But it wasn't empty. Not really. It still carried the echo of everything that had happened inside it. And in the kitchen, it carried something else. The freezer door was slightly ajar. I reached for it without thinking, maybe intending to push it closed. But instead, I saw it, a lemon chiffon cake, boxed, piped with blue and white flowers, my handwriting. I leaned in. The lettering in red gel screamed from the center. "Congrats, Azura!" I froze. The edges of the cake were a little dry, the box sweating from being halfway defrosted. I traced the edge of the icing with my finger, not enough to smear, just enough to feel. I baked that cake 3 weeks ago, at midnight, alone. Just in case, I had told myself. Maybe someone would remember my birthday. Maybe someone would ask. They didn't. She didn't forget, I thought. She just reassigned joy. I took a picture, not for revenge, for record. Then I shut the box gently, like sealing a crime scene. I moved through the house like a guest at a wake, knowing the person who lived here was already gone. In the living room, everything had been reset. Azura's trophies dusted. The picture of him with the governor's aide straightened. I spotted my old coffee mug, white ceramic with a chipped handle, sunshine painted across it in fading script. It was holding sponges now. Of course it was. Erasure didn't always come with scissors. Sometimes it came with quiet repurposing. The fridge was covered with thank you cards from the church, holiday magnets, and a large note scribbled in Cressida's floral script. "Thank you for praying for us. Our daughter is going through a difficult phase." No name, no acknowledgement, just a phase. That word again. Like I was a weather pattern. A storm to outwait. I carried the note into the dining room. Set it down next to the cake. I wanted her to see both. Flashback hit harder than expected. Years ago, she had an asthma attack, middle of the night, gasping, arms flailing. Azura wasn't home, I was. I called 911, held her hand while she wheezed, gave her the inhaler. Sat on the bathroom floor all night with a wet rag pressed to her forehead. The next morning at church, she told everyone, "Azura handled everything beautifully." I didn't say a word, but I never forgot the way her fingers gripped mine when she couldn't breathe, how quickly they let go when the crowd came around. When they forget what you did, I thought, they also forget what you gave up to do it. Back in the guest room, I opened a manila folder and titled a blank sheet, "In case you ever forget what you lived through." I wrote in bullets, "The cake was yours. The silence was never consent. You were not wrong. You were just inconvenient." I added the photo of the cake, the church note, a receipt for the groceries I bought the night I baked it. Then I closed the folder and labeled it. Evidence, emotional. I didn't shred anything. I wasn't there to burn bridges. I was there to log the fire codes. As I zipped my duffel, my phone buzzed. A message from Azura. "You didn't have to make everything a mess, Ella." Attached was a photo. The cake, half-eaten, surrounded by smiling faces. I stared at it, felt nothing rise. "I didn't make the mess," I whispered. "I just stopped cleaning it up." By the time I walked back into Nina's house, something in me had shifted. It wasn't adrenaline anymore. It wasn't even grief. It was precision. The kind that comes after everything inside you has stopped screaming and started taking notes. Nina handed me a cup of coffee like she was passing a torch. No questions, just eyes that scanned my face and saw something she recognized, some quiet edge that had finally sharpened. She sat across from me at the small dining table, still in her hoodie and pajama pants, barefoot, hair up like she hadn't even slept. "This isn't a breakdown," she said after a sip. "It's a build-up." I opened my legal pad and uncapped a pen. "They forgot I remember differently," I said. "They forgot I file things, mentally and literally." She nodded like that made perfect sense, then turned her gaze toward the hallway and gave me space. I needed one more thing, something I hadn't touched in years but never let go. "I'm going to the storage unit," I told her. "I've been paying for it on auto-renew since college. It's time I opened the box they thought I buried." An hour later, I pulled up to a climate-controlled facility on the edge of town. The key still worked. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cardboard and forgotten ambition. Stacked against the back wall were 5 boxes, labeled in my handwriting. High school, church, scholarships, medical, photos. I opened the one marked photos first and almost missed it, wedged between envelopes and yearbooks. A small flash drive, black, unlabeled. The one I'd hidden years ago after Cressida installed a camera in the living room under the guise of home safety. I'd found it by accident and rigged a copy of the feed to save to my laptop, just in case. I plugged the drive into my old laptop and waited. There it was, a clip from 2 years back. The camera angle low and steady, pointed at the kitchen. Briar's voice, loud, already irate. Cressida's silence, constant. In the video, a plate shatters against the wall. A second later, my body flinches. I'm off camera, but the sound is clear, his shoes scraping the tile as he walks away. And her. She doesn't move, just picks up the larger shards of ceramic and drops them into the trash, like it was routine. She wasn't a witness, I murmured. She was an archivist of pain, with a lock on the files. I sat back, the weight of it all pressing against my ribs. Next, I opened the photos box again, digging deeper. Between 2 old folders was a thick manila envelope, postmarked 3 months ago. No name on the front, but the return address said Marigold Street, my old neighbor. Inside was a printout of a 911 call log. The timestamp matched a night I remembered too well. I'd been screaming, loud, frantic. Nothing came of it. There was also a handwritten note. I tried to call. They told me to mind my own business. I kept this anyway. "In case you ever needed it." Below it, a voicemail transcript, Cressida's voice, unmistakable. "Marigold, I would appreciate it if you didn't make a habit of interfering in family matters. We don't need outsiders getting involved in private discipline." I exhaled slowly. My hands didn't shake. They were steady as I clipped the printout to my growing folder. Even my cries had an audience. They just didn't clap. By dusk, I had cleared out the guest room wall at Nina's and turned it into a makeshift timeline, each piece of evidence pinned with thumbtacks. Red string connected key names, incidents, false narratives. At the top of the wall, I wrote in bold marker, erasure pattern, 17 years. Everything was dated, organized. From the missing school photo to the falsified medical reports, from the relabeled birthday cake to the scholarship I never received. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was structural, cultural. "When no one names it," I wrote in a side note, "it keeps winning." I scanned each item and saved a backup. I uploaded them to a private drive and sent a link to Deputy Claire, along with a message, "Backup. If anything happens to me, it's all here." Nina introduced me to a paralegal she trusted, a woman named Kendra who responded within an hour and said she'd take a look at everything free of charge. My abuser wasn't just Briar, it was the silence that let him exist, the rooms that looked the other way, the women who stayed quiet because they had a mortgage to protect or a choir robe to keep clean. I started a document titled, "Open Letter," for anyone who needed it. No names, just patterns. Cressida, Eulalia, the church deacon who once told me to honor thy mother even when my wrist was bandaged. The school counselor who said I was sensitive after I cried in her office. Quote at the top of the page, "No one heals by pretending it didn't happen." It was almost midnight when my phone rang. Claire's name popped up on the screen. "Hey," I answered. Her voice was even, but there was something under it. We need to talk. Something came up in the system. What kind of something? A financial authorization request. Someone's trying to co-sign using your name. I froze. They're still trying to use me. Even now? I whispered, more to myself than her. Claire sighed. We'll look into it, but I thought you should know. The document they submitted had your name and a signature. My mouth was dry. Was it my name? I said slowly. Or my signature? I was back at the station by noon. The sun was too bright for how tired I felt, and my shoes scraped the linoleum as I walked through the front doors. Claire had called first, said she'd found something. I didn't ask what. I was getting used to not being surprised. Inside her office, she didn't offer coffee or small talk, just a folder and a look. There's been a credit inquiry, she said. Your name was used. Someone tried to get pre-approval for a mortgage using your social and listed you as co-signer. I didn't blink. Let me guess. Claire nodded. Cressida. I closed the folder slowly. She didn't just want my silence, I said. She wanted my credit score. You can file a financial protection order, Claire added. I can help you start the paperwork. I'll sign it now. I didn't shake. My signature was clear. And this time, it was mine. Later that afternoon, I parked across the street from the church. Same red brick facade. Same faded marquee that now read, "We are all God's children." I walked in and immediately felt the weight of invisible eyes. The foyer smelled like pine cleaner and judgment. No one greeted me, not even a nod. I made my way to the bulletin board near the fellowship hall. Prayer requests, baby dedications, bake sale notices. Then I saw it. A thank you note signed in loopy cursive. Thank you for supporting us through this family challenge. Our daughter's temporary instability has been difficult, but faith leads us. Cressida. She'd done it again. Painted herself the saint, me the storm. My hands curled into fists. I wasn't angry at the church ladies who looked away. I was angry they looked through me. Pastor James stood by the office doorway, flipping through a clipboard. He glanced up when he saw me, then quickly busied himself again. I didn't approach him. I didn't need his words. Instead, I walked to the office counter and placed a sealed envelope with the inquiry report and the mortgage form inside. I scribbled a note on the outside. For your archives, since you seem to care about those. That night, Azura called. His name on my screen made my stomach tighten, but I answered anyway. You're blowing this out of proportion, he snapped before I could say anything. I didn't reply. I let him spiral. She didn't mean harm. You know how she gets. All that stuff about mental instability. She only said that so people wouldn't overreact. She was just trying to protect herself. I waited. Then I said, calm as steel. She told you that so you wouldn't ask what she was doing with my documents. He paused. That's not fair, he muttered. No, I said. What's not fair is using someone's name and calling them unstable in the same breath. He hung up. I didn't call back. The next morning I wrote, not to Cressida, not to Azura, not to the church. To everyone. I titled it, When Family is the First Gaslight. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I described the patterns, the public performance, the private neglect, the erasure, the co-opting of narratives. I used her language, grace under pressure, private matters, for the family's good, because I knew that's how they would recognize themselves. I posted the letter anonymously to the local paper's opinion column. Then I posted a shorter version on Facebook, just text on a white background, no comments allowed. By evening, it had over 100 shares. One message read, You told my story without using my name. Thank you. That meant more than I expected. That night, Pastor James called. His voice was soft but rehearsed. Hi, Ayala. I wanted to talk about your letter. Some folks are concerned about the tone. Maybe we can sit down and... Have you ever visited a domestic violence shelter, Pastor? A pause. No, he admitted. Then you don't get to decide the volume of my truth. He didn't argue, just sighed and said, I'll be praying for you. I thanked him and ended the call. An hour later, Nina forwarded me a photo from her group chat. It was a screenshot of a printed prayer chain email. Cressida's circle. Her inner sanctum. "Pray for Ayala," it read, "that she may find peace and not bitterness, that she may let go of anger and return to faith." I stared at it, laughed once without humor. "I'm not bitter," I whispered. "I'm just loud." I printed the message, slid it into my binder, and labeled the tab. Sanctified Smear Campaigns. I told Nina I'd be out for a few hours. She didn't ask where I was going, just handed me the keys to her old Saturn and said, "Whatever you find, don't carry it back in your mouth." I drove straight to the house, not the one with fresh trauma, but the one with older ghosts. The home we grew up in. Technically still ours. Practically never really mine. I parked down the street like I used to when sneaking back in after curfew, except this time I walked in through the front door. No knocking, no apologies. I told myself I was there to pick up a few remaining boxes from the attic, a believable enough excuse, and Cressida, being out at her midweek ladies' prayer brunch, wouldn't be back for a while. The attic was hotter than I remembered, dusty, the kind of quiet that makes you suspicious, not comforted. I started shifting through the boxes labeled Christmas and Easter choir robes until I found the black fireproof one shoved behind a plastic crate marked Bunko Night Decor. I opened it slowly, like it might bite. Inside were neatly folded documents, deed copies, tax assessments, loan agreements. My breath caught when I saw my name printed under a refinance form. The address matched the house we stood in. A co-owner, Ayala Martin. Only, I had never signed that form. But there was a signature. Shaky, but similar. Too similar. "They didn't steal my trust," I whispered. "They stole my signature." I took photos, made scans with my phone, and locked the box again, this time with evidence in hand. Back at Nina's, I handed the documents to her friend, Danielle, a notary who worked from her dining table 2 streets over. She flipped through them, scanning lines like she'd done this 1,000 times. "This signature was lifted," she said, "traced or copied from something else." "It's not yours." I didn't flinch. She kept flipping. "They refinanced last year, under joint ownership. Cressida and dependent child AM. "I guess that makes me both beneficiary and liability," I said. Danielle looked up. "You need to file a dispute, immediately." "I'm already drafting it." At Nina's kitchen table, I opened an old flash drive I hadn't touched since I was 19. It was labeled FAFSA 2012. Back then, I'd been applying for financial aid, filling out forms, typing in social security numbers, uploading transcripts. Curiosity, or something sharper, made me open the folder. That's when I saw it. An email chain between Cressida and an administrator at the state scholarship office. She had redirected my application, reworded statements, attached documents under Azura's name, the same GPA, the same essays, the same recommendations. He got the aid, I didn't. All this time, he'd said he earned his scholarship. Merit, he'd claimed. Hard work. Turns out, it was just a recycled identity. Mine. I printed the emails and sealed them in an envelope. "For the attorney," I wrote across the front. Later that evening, I asked them to meet me at the house. No tricks, no yelling, just facts. Cressida opened the door like nothing had happened. Azura followed her into the dining room, quiet, eyes darting. I laid out each document on the table, mortgage form, signature analysis, scholarship emails, all of it. "This is what you took," I said. Cressida didn't blink. "We did what we had to do. Family requires sacrifice." Azura said nothing, just shifted in his chair, jaw tight. "You don't get to name theft as sacrifice," I said. "You get to name it fraud." She folded her hands. "You were always too emotional to understand responsibility." "No," I said. "I understand it perfectly. That's why I'm here alone. You're the ones who needed my name to build something you didn't earn." I packed the files neatly. "You have 48 hours to transfer the property back or I file the dispute publicly. County records, press included." She stared. I didn't. Closure isn't silence. It's putting an end to what they thought they could keep open forever. I walked out without slamming the door. That night, back at Nina's, I opened my email. One new message. Subject: Preemptive retaliation. I clicked. Cressida's lawyer. Formal tone. Long sentences. Vague legal threats. Claimed I was emotionally unstable. Accused me of defamation. Implied legal consequences for publishing private information. I read every word. Then I closed the laptop. They still think the name they buried me under is the name I answer to. It was a gray morning, not quite raining, but heavy with the kind of air that makes you expect it. I sat on the edge of Nina's couch, scrolling through an old external drive I hadn't opened in years. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just gathering whatever might help for court. I almost skipped over the video file. No name, no label, just a string of numbers. 2018-04-12. I clicked. The footage was grainy, handheld, clearly taken from across a bar, but the voice, his voice, cut through the static like a blade. She's always been a liar, always twisting things. Nothing I did wasn't deserved. It was Briar, hair thinner, drunker, loud. He was talking to a stranger, maybe two, laughing between swigs of beer. But there was no joy in it, just bitterness, bubbling over. She thinks she's a victim, but she's just loud, always has been, wants attention. I sat still, watching the screen. He never denied it. He just believed it was his right. The video was taken by Amabel, an old friend from high school. We'd stopped talking around that same year. I wondered if she'd meant to send it to me once and lost the courage. Or maybe she did, and I ignored it, back when I still thought surviving meant pretending. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I downloaded it to 3 separate folders and renamed it Briar Unmasked. That evening, Azura called again. He sounded more tired this time. Worn. "You've ruined everything," he said. No greeting. "Or revealed it?" I asked. There was a pause. Then, "I'm just trying to move on. I have a life." "Sure," I said. "But you built it on someone else's application." He ignored the jab. "You need to look in the mirror." "I do," I said. "That's why I kept the receipts." He hung up. No yelling, just silence. It was louder than anything he could have screamed. Later that night, an email from Deputy Claire hit my inbox. Subject line, body cam, request fulfilled. I clicked the link, downloaded the footage, and watched. The clip was from the morning of the arrest. I could see the kitchen, the edges of my body on the floor, blood staining the tile. But what stopped me was the voice. Cressida, off camera, calm, almost bored. She's always been dramatic, just emotional spells. He didn't hit her that hard. There was a pause, then the officer's voice, steady and low. "That's not your call to make." I replayed it twice, not for the pain, but for confirmation. It was all there, on tape, on record. I posted redacted clips to my blog that same night. No names, just the audio, just the truth. By morning, messages poured in. One from a church member. "We knew. We just didn't know what to say." Another from a former teacher. "I always thought something was off. I'm sorry I didn't ask." I didn't reply, just took screenshots. Saved them in a folder labeled Echoes. The truth doesn't need a microphone. It just needs space. That night, I turned Nina's spare room into a war room. The binder was thicker than I expected. 5 tabs: medical, financial, social, emotional, legal. I laminated each piece: the bar video, the body cam transcript, the mortgage papers, the scholarship fraud. On the cover, I wrote in permanent marker, "This is the story they tried to erase." Nina walked in, looked over the room, and said only, "They really thought you'd fold." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next morning, I walked into the legal aid office. There were 2 chairs in the waiting room. I took the one closest to the wall and kept staring at the empty one across from me. They never showed up when it mattered, I thought. But they left their shadows in every room. The receptionist called my name. "Miss Martin, your lawyer is ready." I stood, ready, not waiting anymore. The courthouse doors opened automatically, but nothing about that day felt automatic. I stepped through with my binder clutched against my ribs, my breath slow and deliberate. The hall smelled like pine cleaner and old paperwork. Too clean to be innocent, too tidy to be honest. I didn't dress to perform. No makeup, no pearls, a plain blazer, clean flats, and a black shirt that didn't say power but didn't beg for mercy either. Nina sat a few rows behind me in the gallery, just far enough not to hover, just close enough to ground me. She had brought tea in a thermos as usual. I shook my head when she offered, not because I didn't want it, but because I needed my mouth dry, my hands empty. I wasn't here to be heard. I was here to be recorded. The room began to fill, a soft murmur of shuffling feet, attorneys rustling files, a woman sneezing behind me. Then they walked in, Cressida and Azura, pastel-wrapped like Easter eggs, polished, contrite.
Staged remorse in every fiber. She wore soft pink, he a pale blue. The lawyer trailing them wore smugness like a pocket square. They slid into their seats at the defendant's table without so much as glancing in my direction. On their side of the table, I spotted a photo album. I knew what was inside before they opened it, smiling snapshots, church events, Christmases, proof that I was the problem for stepping out of the frame. "Counselor," the judge began, "your opening argument?" Cressida's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is a case rooted not in law but in emotion. My clients have been unfairly targeted by claims lacking objective evidence, an emotionally driven defamation campaign by someone experiencing personal instability." The judge looked up slowly from her notes. "Is that your legal argument, Counselor?" He hesitated. "That's the context, Your Honor." "Good," she said. "Let's move to the evidence." I stood, walked to the front with my binder. No dramatics. No theatrics, just the facts. "This is the story they tried to erase," I said. Inside, medical records altered without consent. The forged refinance form listing me as a co-signer. Body cam footage capturing Cressida calling me unstable during an active police investigation. One photo. A cake for Azura designed identically to the one I'd baked for myself. One form. My academic scholarship, redirected and claimed by someone else. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I said. "It's a pattern." Cressida didn't blink. Azura looked down. This wasn't a courtroom, I thought. It was a crime scene with lights on. For hours, the documents spoke for me. Dates, names, signatures, audio clips. Every page laminated, color-coded, cross-referenced. When I finished, the judge remained silent for a long moment, flipping through one of the exhibits. Then she spoke. "This court finds clear evidence of financial misrepresentation, emotional manipulation, and legal misuse of identity. Mrs. Cressida Martin and Mr. Azura Martin are ordered to transfer all property deeds back to their original legal status. Any use of Ayala Martin's name or financial information going forward will be considered a violation of this court's protection order." A pause. "As for Mr. Breyer Martin, a 5-year restraining order will be issued immediately." Cressida inhaled sharply. Azura whispered something I didn't catch. "And finally," the judge added, turning to me directly, "Missing Martin, you are not invisible here. Your voice is on record." I nodded. Just once. It was the only movement I had room for. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled like pavement and pollen. Reporters hovered at the curb like vultures with clipboards. I kept walking. They made me a footnote for years, I thought. I rewrote the index. Nina caught up beside me. "One line," whispered low. "They really thought you'd just cry." Back at her house, I slipped out of my shoes and placed the binder on the desk like it weighed nothing. I breathed. One deep inhale, one exhale. Then my phone buzzed. A church tag notification. Photo of a lit candle, captioned, "We're praying for all families torn apart by pride. May humility prevail." I smiled. No teeth, just fatigue. I screenshot it and filed it under Forgiveness Theater. The silence came not with celebration, but with absence. After the verdict was read, after the gavel struck, after the courthouse emptied out, it wasn't cheers or chaos that followed. It was nothing. No missed calls, no blocked numbers trying again, no texts asking to talk things through. I returned to Nina's that evening and placed the binder down like a completed ritual. I didn't burn it, didn't frame it,
Just opened the cabinet above her fridge, slid it in, and shut the door. No ceremony, no explanation. Sometimes peace doesn't come from justice. Sometimes it comes from no one needing anything from you. That kind of quiet, it was new. Strange, heavy and light all at once. I cleaned out my email, deleted threads, archived others. Let messages from old church friends remain unread. Unimportant. The weight of unread apologies didn't sit heavy when you stopped expecting them. Days passed like water flowing over smooth stone. I didn't cry. I didn't dance. I walked. One afternoon, I drove past the old house, the house I once thought would be my burden forever. There it stood, beige paint peeling, front lawn overgrown. A crooked for sale sign pierced the dirt. Cressida sat on the porch in an old wicker chair, face toward the street but not quite looking. Her eyes were red. She didn't stand when she saw me. "You destroyed everything," she muttered. I stepped out of the car but didn't move forward. "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending it was sacred." She said nothing else. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't need closure from her. I got back in the car and drove away. Back at Nina's, I opened my laptop and typed the first paragraph of something I never thought I'd write under my real name. "You can leave and still be whole." It wasn't a memoir. It wasn't a confession. It was a map. I wrote about silence, about guilt, about the lie of endurance as virtue. I quoted Serafina, "Closure isn't forgiveness. It's a locked door and the key in your pocket." The magazine published it 3 days later. Emails flooded in. Some from strangers. One simply read, "You told my story." That weekend, I returned to the park where Serafina used to take me. Same oak tree, same chipped bench. I brought coffee in her old travel mug. Sat and breathed. "You can't prune a dying tree," she once said. "You have to replant." I took out a photo of us, dog-eared from years of hiding. I existed in it, even if it was never framed. That was enough. From my notebook, I pulled a pressed flower and slid it under the bench. My version of a gravestone. A goodbye without drama. That night, Azura called. I let it ring once before answering. His voice was softer. Hollow. "I read what you wrote. I didn't know half of it." I paused. Then, evenly. "It's not your fault you didn't know. It's your fault you never asked." He didn't defend himself, and I didn't press. We said nothing more. We hung up. There was no promise, no apology, only clarity. The next morning, I checked my mail. One envelope, no return address, inside, an invitation. "We invite Ayala Martin to speak at the Texas Women's Legal Empowerment Summit in Austin." No mention of my family, no backstory request, just my name. It was the first time someone wanted to hear from me without asking about them. The city felt warmer than I remembered, not in temperature, but in the way people moved, rushed but free, loud without shame. I arrived in Austin with a borrowed suitcase, a well-worn binder, and no one waiting for me at the station. And for the first time, that absence didn't sting. I was invited. That was enough. The hotel was modest, the event space tucked between a used bookstore and a taco joint. I walked through the back entrance, past folding chairs being aligned with casual precision. My name was printed on the program, Ayala Martin, guest speaker. Just that, no labels, no qualifiers, not daughter, not survivor, not accuser, just me. When they handed me the mic, I didn't use the notes I had carefully typed and printed in 12-point Georgia font. I spoke from the place where my silence used to live. Your silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And strategy keeps you alive long enough to decide when and where you speak. I told them how names were reassigned, how futures were borrowed, how families rewrite their history like resumes. I said I wasn't discarded, I was deferred. When I stepped down, I didn't expect applause. I got tears. One woman, older, with silver hair and soft hands, reached out and whispered, "Thank you for saying what I never dared admit." Later that day, I checked my phone. A headline blinked. Former church treasurer investigated for financial misconduct. The photo was blurred, but I knew the posture. Arms crossed, mouth thin, Cressida in a blazer too clean for the weight it carried. I whispered, "I didn't expose you. I just stopped dimming the light." 2 days later, I returned to Lufkin, just long enough to retrieve a necklace my grandmother left for me. I saw Azura on Main Street. He crossed before I reached the curb. At the bank, the clerk, a woman named Diane, handed me the deposit box key. As she did, she said quietly, "We all knew something wasn't right. Most of us were just too polite to say it." I nodded. The necklace was right where it had always been. A simple chain, 3 initials carved into the charm. S-E-M. Serafina Elowen Martin. I whispered it aloud, then placed it around my neck. Back in Austin, I moved into a studio apartment above a bakery. No dining room, no silent meals. I started volunteering with a local women's shelter. Every Tuesday, I taught a class called Keeping Track When They Say You're Crazy. My binder stayed on a shelf, closed but never locked. One morning, I received a forwarded letter from a law office. It was from Cressida. 3 lines, handwritten. "You ruined the family. One day, you'll understand what you lost." I didn't reply. That night, I wrote my final blog post. "I lost nothing. You took pieces. I reclaimed the whole." I hit publish. And then I turned off the screen, pulled on a sweater, and walked to the park down the street. The sky was bruised lavender and gold. I didn't think about how it looked. I just walked in it. Later, a notification pinged. An unknown number. "You don't know me, but I read everything. Can we talk?" I smiled. Maybe the story didn't end. Maybe I just gave it away.